You should thank us. We're doing you a favor. That was the subject line of the email from HR. No greeting, no warm-up, just a neon slap of corporate cheerfulness in my inbox at 8:04 a.m., like a dentist announcing he'd removed the wrong tooth, but at least my smile looked strategically optimized. My name is Linda. For 16 years, I was the woman behind the curtain at a mid-sized logistics firm that ran smoother than it deserved to. I wasn't the CEO, or the VP of sales with his loud ties and louder ego. I was the one who kept the rules straight. Payroll filed correctly, contractors properly classified, labor compliance reports submitted on time. Every time. Invisible work. Essential work. The kind of work that makes or breaks a company in ways no one claps for at quarterly meetings. I wasn't the one telling jokes in the break room. I wasn't baking cupcakes for Carol in accounting. But when someone's health insurance mysteriously vanished mid-treatment, or when overtime went missing from paychecks, who fixed it? Me. Always me. Quiet Linda with the cluttered desk and the memory of an IRS agent. And for all that, what did I get? A title that sounded like something scraped off the bottom of an org chart. Operations Specialist 2. Which in plain English means the duct tape, the aspirin, the mop crew for bureaucratic sewage. So when HR hit me with that email, you should thank us. We're doing you a favor. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even let my coffee get cold. Because here's the thing. When you spend 16 years cleaning up everyone else's mistakes, you learn two things. 1. People always underestimate the quiet one. 2. Every system leaves a paper trail. But let me rewind for a moment. It started with a vague calendar invite. Quick sync, HR and OPS. That's the kind of subject line that smells like disinfectant and bad news. I walked in and found Janice from HR perched behind the conference table, smile so wide it looked stapled in place. Next to her sat a fresh-faced intern, clicking her pen like she was about to announce my prize on a game show. Linda, Janice began, voice sugary enough to rot teeth. We want to thank you for your many years of service. Truly invaluable translation, death sentence in corporate. We've been restructuring strategically, she continued, reading from a script like a hostage. And unfortunately, your position has been deemed redundant. Redundant? The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Redundant, as though I were an old paperclip or an outdated software license. Then came the kicker. But this is really a favor to you, Janice added brightly, as if gifting me a cruise to nowhere. It's a chance for you to explore new opportunities. We're even offering a modest severance of favor. That word lit a fuse somewhere deep in me. Because favors are what you ask when someone covers your lunch bill or waters your plants while you're on vacation. Favors are not what you call gutting someone's career after nearly 2 decades of loyalty. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. Because I didn't need to. I had something stronger than fury. Receipts. 16 years worth of audit trails, compliance memos, and policy clarifications saved neatly in folders that could make or break the building's foundation. I nodded once. Understood, I said. Calm, professional. The kind of calm that should come with a warning label. Janice mistook it for acceptance. She smiled wider, slid a manila envelope toward me, exit packet, printed on cheap paper, and chirped, You'll land on your feet, Linda. We're doing you a favor. I left the room without ceremony, passed by the office plants that had lived longer than half our interns, and sat back down at my desk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I reread Janice's email twice. That phrase again, doing you a favor, and then I did something very simple. I hit reply, 4 words, thanks for confirming. And then, like seasoning a perfect roast, I added one more detail, a quiet little CC to the State Labor Board's wage and hour division. Not a rant, not a manifesto, not a single word of anger. Just professional courtesy. Because here's the secret. When you're the one who's been documenting every line of labor code compliance for 16 years, you don't need fireworks. You just need sunlight. I clicked send, sat back, took a sip of my bitter coffee, and smiled. They thought they'd done me a favor. They had no idea what they'd just started. An hour after I hit send, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it buzz until voicemail kicked in. 3 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. I sighed, pushed my chair back, and answered. Linda? The voice was tight, clipped, like it was holding its breath. It was Robert, the CFO. The same Robert who once forwarded my 18-page compliance memo to his assistant with the note, "Summarize this in 3 bullet points." Yes, I said, neutral as a weather report. What did you do? His voice cracked at the edges. 7 years of payroll under audit? The labor board is involved already? I glanced at my email screen. The reply sat there, polite, professional, harmless on the surface. I asked for clarification, I said, and copied the state. That's all. There was silence. The kind of silence you could feel sweating through the line. Finally, he muttered, "You don't understand what this could mean." Oh, but I did. I understood exactly. By the afternoon, whispers were moving faster than office gossip after a Christmas party. My friend Carla from operations messaged me from her personal email. What the hell did you do? Everyone looks like they've seen a ghost. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I leaned back and thought about it. Because here's the truth. I hadn't done anything dramatic. I hadn't stormed out or called a lawyer. I hadn't leaked files or called a journalist. I'd simply pointed the flashlight at the corner they never dusted. That was enough. The next day, the first signs of panic became visible. HR sent a company-wide memo titled, "Friendly Reminder, Confidentiality in Employment Matters." The kind of email dressed up in best practices but reeking of fear. As we navigate a period of strategic review, please remember not to discuss internal processes with external parties. Misunderstandings can lead to unnecessary escalation. Translation: Don't be like Linda. I laughed out loud. They thought they could spin this as gossip control. What they didn't realize was that the labor board doesn't care about spin. They care about records. And I knew exactly which records would give them heartburn. By lunchtime, another message landed, this time forwarded from a mole inside finance. Subject line: Urgent Contractor Archive Audit. Start date 2016. There it was, the crack widening. Because here's the thing about companies that run on duct tape and denial. Once someone starts pulling at the threads, the whole patchwork unravels. Contractors reclassified as employees? Overtime logged incorrectly? Missing I-9 forms? All of it mattered. And all of it lived in files I'd organized, flagged, or quietly fixed for years. I hadn't carried grudges, but I had carried a memory sharper than a filing cabinet edge. That night, Carla texted me again. They had a whiteboard meeting today. Words like liability exposure and retroactive pay are being tossed around. People are sweating, Linda. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down with my cat purring on my lap, and thought about the irony. For years, they'd brushed off my emails, my flagged issues, my polite warnings. Not urgent, they'd say. We'll circle back. Now, the circle was complete. Here's the thing I need you to understand. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted recognition. I wanted them to see that my work mattered, that the invisible labor of keeping a company compliant was not disposable. But when you push someone into a corner and call it a favor, don't be surprised when they finally step out with receipts. 2 days later, the whispers turned into fog. Slack channels went quiet. People stopped posting memes and inside jokes. Instead, they renamed threads things like hashtag urgent dash, doc dash review, and hashtag policy dash alignment. Robert, the CFO, hadn't been seen in the cafeteria. Rumor was he was holed up with outside counsel. Janice from HR was spotted crying in the bathroom. And Jeff from accounting, Oh, Jeff was heard muttering, "What the hell is a 1099B2 modifier?" Like a man begging for mercy. Me? I was at home, drinking my coffee, watering my plant, watching it all unfold without lifting another finger. Because the truth is, I hadn't burned anything down. I just handed the fire marshal a copy of the inspection report. The irony? My name wasn't on a single office door. I didn't get the bonus trips or the applause at staff meetings. I was invisible. But now, invisibility was my weapon. They had no idea how much I'd seen, how much I'd documented, how many warnings I'd quietly filed away because nobody wanted to deal with minor compliance issues. Now those minor issues were the earthquake shaking their glass tower. And all it had taken was one email. 4 words. 1 CC. The official letter came on a Tuesday morning. 2 pages. Polite devastation. Signed, stamped, and sent from the State Labor Board's regional office. Pursuant to the inquiry received, our team will be conducting a payroll and classification audit beginning Thursday. 7 years of records, payroll logs, contractor agreements, overtime policies, even internal communications if deemed necessary. It was clinical, detached, almost boring in its wording. But to anyone who has worked in compliance long enough, it was the equivalent of a thunderclap in a boardroom. By noon, the letter had been forwarded to half the executive team. By 2, a copy had been printed and taped inside the HR office like a haunted relic. By 5, Robert, the CFO, had reportedly gone home early, muttering something about mitigation strategies. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat. Instead, I brewed another cup of bitter coffee and sat at my kitchen table with Deborah, my little office plant, perched under her LED lamp. She had survived the move from my desk to my apartment without complaint. Unlike the executives, she was thriving. That's the thing people miss about power. It doesn't always come in shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes power is patience. Sometimes it's having the receipts when everyone else is scrambling to invent excuses. And I had all the receipts. Carla, my old teammate, sent me a blurry photo that night. A whiteboard in conference room C, scrawled with red marker. Payroll audit prep. Immediate action items. Beneath it, retrieve contractor files 2016 to 2022. Review overtime classifications. Cross-check exempt/non-exempt grids. Confirm archived I-9 documentation. It read less like a meeting agenda and more like a crime scene investigation. She added a note. You should see their faces, Linda. It's like someone pulled the fire alarm in church. I smiled. Not because I enjoyed their panic, but because for once they were treating my work with the gravity it deserved. The next day, a company-wide memo went out. As part of ongoing internal improvements, HR and finance will be conducting a thorough review of records. Please respond promptly to requests for documentation. Ongoing improvements. That was their phrase. As if the labor board's arrival was just part of spring cleaning. But no memo could hide the cracks. Former colleagues started messaging me from personal accounts. Is it true they're pulling 7 years of payroll? One asked. Another whispered that legal had already flown in a specialist from Columbus. And Jeff from accounting? Word was he had a minor breakdown after being asked to provide contractor expense notes dating back to 2016. Who even keeps that long? He'd shouted before someone gently reminded him. I did. That evening, Robert called again. His voice was lower this time, almost pleading. Linda, listen. If this audit expands, we're talking serious penalties, back pay, fines, even investor fallout. Are you sure you want to push this? I sipped my coffee, let the silence hang, then said, I didn't push anything. I asked a question. Everything else is your documentation. He exhaled hard, a sound like defeat leaking through the line. This could destroy us. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the look on Janice's face when she told me I was redundant. The chirpy tone, the cheap manila envelope, the phrase doing you a favor. Destroy them? Number. I wasn't destroying anything. They were simply being forced to face what they'd ignored for years. By Thursday morning, the office looked like a bunker. Legal boxes stacked in hallways. Laptops carried out of conference rooms like stretchers. Emails shortened to one-line replies, stripped of emojis and casual chatter. Carla's final message of the week summed it up best. Linda, they taped your email to the HR office door. People call it the trigger. I stared at the screen for a long time, then laughed quietly, because it wasn't the email that caused this storm. It wasn't me at all. It was them. Their shortcuts, their arrogance, their belief that the quiet worker would never speak, never fight back, never know how to make the system listen. And now the system was listening. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat in my recliner, and watched the city lights flicker through my window. Somewhere downtown, in a glass office tower, executives were scrambling to rewrite history, hunting for missing forms and trying to explain away years of neglect. Me? I had nothing left to prove. I'd spent 16 years cleaning up their messes. Now, for once, the mess was theirs alone. And the audit had only just begun. The auditors arrived on a gray Thursday morning. No fanfare, no drama, just two state officials in dark suits carrying briefcases and clipboards. Not FBI agents with flashing badges, not journalists with cameras. Just people who looked like they lived and breathed regulations, the kind who could ruin a career with a raised eyebrow and a citation. Inside the office, panic was already thick. Carla texted me before 9. They're here. Real labor board people. Suits, badges, everything. The conference room looks like a war bunker. I pictured it. The whiteboard wiped clean, replaced with rows of binders, finance staff pacing, HR interns pretending to be useful, handing out bottled water like they were hosting royalty, and Robert, the CFO, trying to keep his voice steady while knowing the foundation under him was cracking. I wasn't there, of course. I was at home, in sweatpants, sipping coffee. But my phone buzzed with updates like a live news feed. They're asking for overtime logs from 2017. Carla wrote. Legal looks pale. Janice keeps saying operational optimization like it's a prayer. I leaned back in my chair, Deborah the plant soaking up sunlight on the windowsill. For once, I wasn't the one fixing the mess. I was just watching, and it was strangely satisfying. Here's the part most people don't understand about audits. They're not explosive. They're slow, methodical, suffocating. They don't shout. They dig. They ask for one document, then another, then the thing you swore you'd never need again from 2016. By mid-afternoon, Carla texted. They asked for contractor agreements from 2018. Janice said they were archived. Auditors asked her to prove it. She froze. I could almost hear the silence in that room, because I knew exactly what was in those 2018 files, or rather, what wasn't. Missing I-9s. Misclassified employees treated like contractors. Notes I'd flagged, ignored at the time because not urgent. Now, suddenly, urgent. The next day, the company sent out another memo. As part of our cooperation with state auditors, please provide any requested records immediately. Confidentiality is critical at this time. Confidentiality. Their favorite word when the walls started closing in. But confidentiality can't hide years of shortcuts. It can't hide the Friday afternoons when directors logged out early but still claimed full hours. It can't hide the contractors who worked 40-hour weeks without benefits. And the auditors? They weren't fooled by buzzwords. They wanted proof. Robert called me again that evening. His voice was thinner now, fraying at the edges. Linda, look, if there's anything you can clarify. I cut him off. I'm not involved anymore. You don't understand, he said, almost whispering. They're talking about back pay. 7 figures, penalties. This could sink us. I let the silence stretch, then answered evenly. If it can sink you, Robert, maybe the ship wasn't built right to begin with. He didn't reply, just exhaled, defeated before hanging up. That weekend, I heard from Carla again. She'd stayed late on Friday, watching the executives shuffle in and out of closed-door meetings. They had food delivered, 3 times, she wrote. Legal, HR, finance, all locked in. No one's making eye contact in the hallways anymore. The cracks were no longer hidden. They were wide open. And all because of one polite CC. Here's the irony. For years, I'd been invisible. The quiet woman by the supply closet, fixing the things nobody wanted to think about. My emails ignored. My memos skimmed. My work dismissed as routine. Now, suddenly, I wasn't invisible at all. My name was on the audit file. My email, the one with 4 words, was taped to HR's door like a warning sign. Employees whispered it in the break room. The trigger. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't staged a protest. I hadn't burned a single bridge. I'd just flipped on the inspection light. That Sunday evening, I sat on my couch with a glass of red wine, the city humming outside my window. I thought about what was happening in that office tower, the frantic copying of files, the nervous glances at auditors, the whispered blame games behind closed doors. And I realized something. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, destructive. This was something else. This was accountability. They had spent years teaching me to be quiet, to accept, to stay in my lane. But the truth is, sometimes the quietest action is the loudest consequence. And now the reckoning was only getting started. The audit lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of auditors combing through records, asking questions, and quietly scribbling notes that made executives sweat through their suits. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. The updates reached me anyway. Through Carla, through former colleagues, even through the sudden silence on LinkedIn where managers who once bragged about innovation stopped posting entirely. The results came down in the form of a letter. 2 paragraphs. Direct, clinical, devastating. The company had failed to properly classify dozens of workers over multiple years. Overtime had been withheld from exempt employees who were routinely asked to respond after hours. Contractors had been misused, mismanaged, and mislabeled. The penalties? Back pay, fines, and interest. 7 figures. Not minor, not a slap on the wrist. Enough to shake investors. Enough to put names in headlines. Carla messaged me the day the letter hit. Linda, you wouldn't believe it. Emergency all hands. CFO looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Janice was pale as a ghost. People are whispering layoffs are coming. Real ones this time. I read her words slowly, then closed my laptop. This was never what I wanted. I hadn't dreamed of the company collapsing. I hadn't spent years imagining them suffering. No, what I wanted was recognition. Proof that my work mattered. That the quiet labor of keeping the machine compliant wasn't disposable. But sometimes the only way to make people see the cracks is to let the whole structure shake. A week later, Robert called me again. His voice was tired, defeated. Linda, he said softly, the board wants answers. Investors are furious. We're facing millions in liability. Why? Why did you do this? I let him finish, then answered calmly, I didn't do this, Robert. You did. All of you. I asked for clarification. Everything else was already there, waiting. He was silent for a long time. I could almost picture him in his office, blinds half drawn, papers stacked like sandbags around him. A man drowning in the very negligence he'd once brushed aside as not urgent. Finally, he said, we might not survive this. I didn't gloat. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply said, maybe you shouldn't have called it a favor. Then I hung up. Here's the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. What I felt was something closer to peace. For 16 years, I'd carried the weight of their mistakes, patching holes no one thanked me for. They saw me as replaceable, redundant, invisible. But invisibility had been my shield. They never noticed how much I knew, how carefully I paid attention, how many files I kept in order. They never realized that the quietest person in the room might also be the one who remembered every detail. And in the end, that was what undid them. Not rage, not sabotage, just memory. The company survived, technically. They downsized. They restructured. Robert resigned for personal reasons. Janice moved on quietly, her reputation bruised. A new compliance officer was hired, this time with a seat at the leadership table. Carla told me morale was shattered, but some employees finally felt like things might change. Policies were rewritten. Time logs actually mattered. People whispered my name in the hallways, sometimes with blame, sometimes with respect. Me? I didn't go back. I started consulting. Small businesses, nonprofits, startups. The kinds of places that couldn't afford seven-figure mistakes. I taught them how to avoid the traps, how to build compliance into their bones. And for the first time, people listened. For the first time, they saw me not as invisible, but as essential. Looking back now, I see the irony. They fired me because they thought I was redundant. Because they thought I was quiet, safe, easy to discard. But the quietest people are often the ones holding everything together. And sometimes all it takes to be heard is 4 words and a CC. So here's my message to anyone watching this. Anyone who's ever felt invisible at work, at home, or in their own family. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. And quiet doesn't mean powerless. Because the people who underestimate you are often the ones who hand you the tools to hold them accountable. I didn't burn the building down. I just turned on the lights. And in that light, the truth did all the work for me. For 5 years, I built the firm's entire client base. 46 companies who trusted me with their biggest risks and their most fragile secrets. No vacations, no sick days. 70-hour weeks that blurred into each other. I was always the one answering the midnight calls, the one who could take chaos and put it back into order. My life was the firm. My name wasn't on the door, but without me, the doors would have shut long ago. On the day the CEO's son took over, he replaced me with his girlfriend. It's just business. He laughed, extending a hand I didn't want to shake. I forced myself to take it, then walked out without saying a word. He thought he had won. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. His name was Brandon Harlan, 30 years old. The kind of confidence you inherit, not the kind you earn. Glossy hair, expensive shoes, and the smirk of someone who had never had to finish what he started. He had spent the last few years advising startups, which in practice meant traveling, writing empty blog posts, and calling it thought leadership. The moment his father retired, the title executive director was handed to him like a birthday present. He redecorated almost instantly. The framed degrees and legal texts that once lined the shelves were packed away. In their place, a putting green and a neon sign that glowed over his desk. Move fast, break molds. Cultural momentum, he told me when he called me in. We're rewarding people who bring energy. Is there an issue with the Morrison procurement deal? I asked, calm as always. Or with the Eagle Ridge refinancing? Both had taken months of my time, and they were days from closing. It's not about details. He made a broad gesture toward the skyline. We need vibes. That was his word. Vibes. Then came the folder. A non-compete that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. An NDA filled with vague threats and 3 months severance if I didn't make trouble. Beside him sat Maya, his girlfriend, who had been hired as a paralegal only a few weeks earlier. She smiled at me as if she'd just won a prize. I'll manage Tessa's transitions, she said. You can't manage what you don't understand, I replied. My voice stayed even. And you can't sign anything that requires a license. That's no longer your concern, Brandon said. He leaned back, satisfied, like this was just another item on his to-do list. Then he added a word that still stung. You're competent. Nobody's saying you're not competent. The way he said it, it sounded like worthless. I signed what I could sign. Refused what I knew was unenforceable. Left my badge on his desk. Packed my mug in a cardboard box. And I walked out of the building with my head high, past the reflection of that ridiculous neon sign. At home, I set the banker's box on my dining table and opened my laptop. There were no dramatic speeches, no immediate revenge, just a quiet inventory. Lawyers are trained to separate facts from noise, and I was still a lawyer. The firm owned the files, the letterhead, the building, the marble lobby that impressed visitors. But I owned the frameworks I had built on my own time. The templates, the checklists, the training modules that turned chaos into order. I owned my knowledge. And most importantly, I owned the relationships. 46 clients whose loyalty had been earned through years of late nights, steady guidance, and trust. Trust doesn't belong to a firm. It belongs to the person who shows up when no one else will. I opened my personal contact list. 46 names, each more than a client. People who had let me into their lives, who had texted me pictures of newborns and anniversaries, who had whispered fears they couldn't share with their boards. I drafted one sentence on LinkedIn. Effective today, I will be consulting independently on contract risk and operational compliance. No mention of the firm. No drama, just a statement of fact. And then I pressed publish. Not long after, my phone buzzed. Tessa, just saw your update. Coffee tomorrow? Same cafe? Helena Cho, CFO of one of my earliest clients. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The NDA didn't forbid coffee. It didn't forbid friendship. And Helena had never been someone who spoke casually. I typed back, as friends, always. That night, my dining room became a war room. I laid out my notes, printed the frameworks I had created, opened the files I'd organized in my personal cloud. No client data, nothing proprietary. Just the systems that made me good at my job. At 9:21, another message lit my phone. Tessa, I don't know if you can respond, but the new team just asked me what material adverse change means in our lender agreement. We close Friday. I feel sick. The words hit me like a punch. That clause had nearly cost Helena her financing once before. I had pulled her company back from disaster by making sure it was documented properly. Now she was back at the edge, with someone who didn't even know the definition. I typed slowly, carefully. I can't discuss your deal, but I can meet you as a friend and talk about general concepts. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., she replied. Old cafe. Same table, and Tessa? It's not just business when people forget why they're in business. When I put my phone down, the room was quiet. I rinsed my mug, set it beside the sink, and thought about those words. In the weeks that followed, people would say the firm collapsed in 30 days, that 46 clients left overnight. But in that moment, standing in my kitchen, I wasn't thinking about their empire. I was thinking about trust. The kind you can't buy. The kind you can't fake. The kind Brandon had never even noticed until it was already gone. And tomorrow at 7 a.m., I was about to be reminded that trust is stronger than marble lobbies or neon signs. The cafe was nearly empty when I walked in the next morning. Same cracked leather booths, same smell of burnt espresso, same elderly barista who'd been there since my first year at the firm. It was the place I'd gone whenever I needed to think, when cases were falling apart or negotiations dragged into the night. Now it was where I was about to sit across from Helena Cho, CFO of Calwell Manufacturing, one of my longest-standing clients. She was already at the back table, a half-drunk cappuccino in front of her, phone face down. When she saw me, she stood, and for a moment I thought she might hug me. Instead, she clasped both my hands. Tessa, what the hell happened? I slid into the booth across from her. It's complicated, I said carefully. Mostly nepotism, a little arrogance, and a lot of poor judgment. Her mouth tightened. Brandon? I didn't confirm or deny. You know I can't talk about firm business. I signed things, but I can say this. I'm no longer there and I'm exploring independent work. She leaned back, eyes sharp. Independent? Consulting, I clarified. Contract risk, compliance frameworks, negotiation prep. My own systems, my own intellectual property. Not representing anyone directly. For now, Helena exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all night. Good. Because yesterday, the new team asked me to define material adverse change in writing. They're handling our refinancing, Tessa. $120 million on the line. And they don't know the most basic clause. I felt my stomach tighten. I remembered the panic 2 years earlier when Calwell's lenders tried to pull financing after a minor dip in quarterly earnings. I had spent 3 straight days negotiating carve-outs and thresholds that saved their credit line. Without those terms, the company might not even exist today. I can't comment on your deal, I said slowly, but I can tell you what the clause means in general. It's about risk, about lenders protecting themselves if something goes catastrophically wrong. It has to be negotiated carefully, or it becomes a trap. Helena pressed her palms together. That's exactly what I told them. And do you know what they said? Don't worry, we'll Google it. The barista set down 2 fresh coffees without being asked. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Helena, I wish I could help. But if I say too much, they'll drag me into court. You know how aggressive that family can be. I'm not asking you to break contracts, she said. I'm asking you to keep being who you've always been. The one person I can call when things get dangerous. I don't care if you're at Harlan and Pierce or sitting in your kitchen. I trust you. Her words stung more than Brandon's dismissal the day before. Trust. That was the currency I had always valued most. It wasn't written into any contract, but it was what every client came to me for. Here's what I can do, I said finally. I'll build general frameworks. Educational, not specific. Regulatory updates, compliance alerts, explanations of concepts that are publicly available. No client names, no deal references. If people read them and realize something applies to their situation, that's on them. Not me. Helena smiled faintly. That's all I needed to hear. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a LinkedIn notification. My post from the night before already had dozens of reactions, half from people in the corporate community we both moved in. You won't need to reach out, she said. They'll come to you. I left the cafe with my heart racing. For 5 years, I'd been invisible, competent, reliable, never flashy. Now, for the first time, I could feel the weight of 46 relationships shifting, recalibrating around me instead of the firm. By the afternoon, 3 more messages appeared on my phone. We need to talk. David Klein, COO, Nexus Biotech. Do you know anyone who can actually read an indemnity clause? Sarah Rodriguez, General Counsel, Blackstone Holdings. Lunch this week? Off the record. Daniel Foster, CFO, Meridian Corp. Each message was a test of boundaries. I typed careful responses. Happy to catch up as friends. Always available to discuss industry trends. No firm ties anymore, just my own perspective. Every word measured, every sentence crafted to honor the agreements I had signed while still leaving the door open. Because the truth was, the clients weren't asking for firm representation anymore. They were asking for me. That evening, I spread papers across my dining table again. My frameworks, my training decks, my checklists. Not the firm's property. Mine. Developed on nights and weekends when their clunky systems crashed, refined deal after deal until they worked like second nature. I opened a new document on my laptop and typed the header. Independent Compliance Guidance, January edition. Underneath, I wrote the first topic. Material adverse change, what it means and why it matters. Not advice, not specific, just education. The kind of thing any law professor could lecture on, but written with the clarity only someone who had lived through it could provide. As I typed, the weight of the last 24 hours settled into something sharper. Brandon thought he had cut me out of the picture. What he hadn't realized was that I was the picture. The clients didn't stay because of the neon signs or the marble lobby. They stayed because I picked up the phone at 2 a.m. and walked them through crises with a steady voice. By midnight, the document was finished. 10 pages. Clean, professional, and ready to send to anyone who asked. Not as their lawyer, but as an independent consultant. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the dining room. The box from the office still sat in the corner, unopened except for my mug. Billable and breathable. A cheap joke once. Now it felt like a relic. I wasn't billable anymore. I wasn't theirs anymore. I was free. And freedom, I realized, was the one thing Brandon had never considered when he shoved that folder across the desk. He thought he was cutting me loose. What he really did was cut the tether that bound me to his sinking ship. The phone buzzed again. Helena, this time with just 4 words. Friday won't happen without you. I closed my eyes. The tide had already turned. By Friday morning, the air in my house felt heavy, like the pressure before a storm. I tried to distract myself with errands, even scrubbed the kitchen floor, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the counter. At 10:42, Helena called. Her voice was tight, clipped. It's over, Tessa. The refinancing collapsed. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. What happened? They missed the deadline for the lender's supplemental disclosures. Something about an electronic signature mismatch. I don't even think they knew the documents had to be notarized. The lender pulled the deal. Her voice cracked. Do you know what that means? 2 years of positioning, hundreds of hours, millions of dollars in fees. Gone. The board is furious. I rubbed my forehead, feeling the ache spread behind my eyes. I'm so sorry, Helena. Don't be sorry. Her words were sharp, but not at me. Be ready. People are going to call you. I know you can't solicit, but I also know this. What just happened is going to spread like wildfire. When we hung up, I stared at the box still sitting by the wall, filled with the remnants of 5 years of my life. The mug, the pens, a few framed certificates. Small things. But what they represented was enormous. Brandon and Maya had been at the helm for less than a week, and already one of the firm's cornerstone clients had suffered a collapse. At 11:30, a text came through from Marcus, one of the senior associates who'd worked under me. You didn't hear this from me, but Helena just called Brandon every name in the book. She demanded her file back. She's gone, Tessa. She's done with them. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. One domino had fallen, and I knew how this game worked. When one top client leaves, others start to wonder if they should too. That afternoon, 2 more messages arrived. From Sarah Rodriguez at Blackstone Holdings. Tessa, is it true Helena left? From David Klein at Nexus Biotech. Heard a mess at Calwell. We need to talk. I responded cautiously, always the same refrain. I can't discuss specifics, but I'm available as a friend if you'd like to catch up. The distinction mattered. It was the line between surviving and being dragged into litigation. Still, I knew the truth. These weren't just friendly check-ins. They were lifelines being thrown in my direction because the people holding them no longer trusted the hands that were supposed to be guiding them. That evening, I sat at my dining table surrounded by papers. The frameworks I had created stared back at me, quiet proof of the difference between competence and chaos. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up redrafting clauses until they sang, the weekends I'd missed weddings and birthdays because a client needed me to save their deal. That investment wasn't something you could just swap out for a neon sign and a girlfriend with a new title. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. I hesitated before answering. Tessa, I don't care about NDAs, she said the moment I picked up. Our board is demanding answers. We got a compliance notice from the state last night. If it's real, we're in trouble. And the new team at Harlan and Pierce told me not to panic. Do you know what they based that on? A Google search. My throat tightened. Sarah, you know I can't advise you on firm matters anymore. I don't want advice, she snapped. Then her voice softened. I want to know if I'm crazy for thinking they're in over their heads. I closed my eyes. You're not crazy. She exhaled, long and heavy. That's enough. That's all I needed to hear. Thank you. When I hung up, I realized something. The clients weren't asking me to swoop in and take over. They were asking me to confirm what they already suspected, that they weren't safe where they were. And once a client stops feeling safe, it's only a matter of time before they move. By Monday morning, the cracks had widened. Helena's departure was already circulating in Houston's corporate circles. The whispers were growing louder. The new leadership was incompetent, deals were failing, and the one person who had held everything together was gone. Marcus sent another text. Emergency meeting this morning. Brandon tried to reassure the team, but no one's buying it. Maya was in tears. I give it 2 weeks before everything unravels. I placed the phone face down on the table and leaned back in my chair. For years, I had been invisible, my work taken for granted. Now, for the first time, I wasn't just visible. I was unavoidable. The first domino had fallen. The others were wobbling, and all I had to do was let gravity take care of the rest. 2 weeks later, the firm looked like a house with the foundation ripped out. From the outside, it still stood. Marble lobby, brass plaques, glossy brochures, but inside, everything was crumbling. I didn't have to guess. The calls and texts painted the picture for me. Sarah Rodriguez sent me a photo of a filing riddled with typos. This is what they submitted on our behalf. I can't let this continue. David Klein's voice shook when he called. They forgot to file an export compliance certificate. Do you know what the fines would have been if the regulator caught it? Millions, Tessa. Millions. And Marcus, steady Marcus, texted me late one night. 3 partners walked out today. Brandon screamed at everyone. Maya hasn't shown up in 2 days. It's chaos. One by one, the clients left. They didn't announce it, didn't make a scene. They just stopped returning Brandon's calls, stopped paying invoices, and quietly retained other firms. Some reached out to me, carefully phrased, always cautious. Do you have bandwidth for independent consulting? Or could we meet to discuss frameworks? I never solicited, never crossed the line, but I answered every message. By the end of the month, the count was staggering. Out of 46 clients, 45 were gone. The last holdout was Thorne Industries, run by Robert Thorne, a man who played golf with William Harlan, Brandon's father. Loyalty, not competence, kept them tethered. I knew it couldn't last. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number, Houston area code. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the transcript popped up. Miss Miles, this is Linda Cho, General Counsel for Thorne Industries. We need to meet. Today, if possible. I stared at the message. Thorne was the last domino. If they left, the firm wasn't just weakened, it was finished. We met in a quiet conference room at a downtown hotel. Linda looked exhausted. We trusted them because of Robert's friendship with William. But Brandon's team drafted our supplier contracts last month. They missed an arbitration clause. Do you understand what that means for us? Yes, I said softly. It means you could be dragged into court instead of settling privately. Exposure, costs, delays. It's a nightmare. She nodded, eyes heavy. We can't afford to stay. But we also can't afford a public battle. Robert wants this handled quietly. I folded my hands on the table. Then you need to transition. Find a new firm that will protect you. Quickly. Her gaze sharpened. And who do you recommend? The question hung between us. I thought of all the times I'd been told I was competent, reliable, never flashy. And I realized this was my moment to prove that being competent was more than enough. I recommend myself, I said finally. Independent consulting. Contract risk, compliance, negotiation strategy. I'll work alongside whatever firm you retain. I won't replace them, but I'll make sure this never happens again. Linda studied me for a long time. Then she extended her hand. Consider yourself retained. That night, I sat at my dining table, contract signed, coffee cooling beside me. The war room I had built from scraps now felt like the headquarters of something real. At 8:15, Marcus called. It's over, he said. His voice was flat. Robert Thorne pulled his account today. That was the last client. Brandon's finished, I closed my eyes. 5 years of my life, swallowed by arrogance in a single month. But it wasn't grief I felt. It was relief. The next morning, the Houston Business Journal ran the headline, Harlan and Pierce loses entire client base in 30 days. The article cited nepotism, mismanagement, and lack of qualified leadership as causes. My name wasn't mentioned, but the subtext was obvious. The clients had followed the person they trusted, not the firm that betrayed her. Later that week, I met Helena again at the cafe. She raised her cup in a mock toast. 46 clients gone in 30 days. Do you realize what you did? I didn't do anything, I said quietly. They made their choices. No, Tessa, she said, leaning forward. You reminded us that trust matters more than marble floors or fancy titles. That's what you did. Her words stayed with me. Trust. That was the lesson. Not revenge, not destruction. Trust. I walked out of the cafe into the Houston sunlight and felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. I wasn't chained to someone else's name on the building. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was Tessa Miles, and I had built something that couldn't be stolen or replaced. And as for Brandon? The last I heard, he was trying to pitch disruptive legal innovation on LinkedIn, the kind of hollow noise that only works until someone asks a real question. Me? I was too busy answering the phone, because when 46 clients leave in 30 days, it doesn't mean the end. It means the beginning of something new.